You know, sometimes I wonder if you feel it too, that quiet ache that lives somewhere between your ribs and your memory. That strange, bittersweet longing for a time that feels close enough to touch, but impossibly far to return to. And if you're anything like me, you probably feel it strongest when your mind drifts back to the 1980s, to the streets, the games, and the friends who shaped the person you became. Because there are days when I wake up and, for a split second, I genuinely expect to hear the sound of a screen door slamming, or the distant echo of kids' laughter bouncing off warm pavement. Sometimes I still mistake the hum of the city for the steady buzz of bicycles rolling down asphalt, or the click of arcade buttons in a dimly lit corner store. Memory is funny like that. It tricks you, pulls you, whispers to you. And tonight, I want to follow that whisper. I want to take you with me, back to the place where everything seemed bigger, even though the world itself was smaller. Back to a time when friendships were built not through screens, but through scraped knees, shared secrets, and the promise that tomorrow we'd meet at the same spot, same time, no excuses. As I close my eyes, I can almost smell the air of those late afternoon summers. It had its own texture, warm, dusty, with a hint of cut grass and the faint sweetness of someone's mom baking something 2 houses down. The sunlight had a golden weight to it, the kind you don't see anymore, a kind that made even the cracks in the sidewalk look like part of some beautiful forgotten map. And the shadows, they were longer back then. Or maybe we were just smaller. I remember standing at the edge of my street, holding my old sneakers by the laces, letting the breeze cool the sweat on my forehead after an entire day spent outside. There was no rush to go home, no constant ticking clock. The world didn't demand our attention every second. Life happened slowly, naturally, like a song fading in and out of a radio tune just slightly off-center. Every corner had a memory etched into it. The mailbox we used as a goalpost, the tree with the carved initials no one ever admitted to, the curb where we sat for hours talking about things we barely understood, the universe, the future, the strange mysteries of growing up. Sometimes, if I think hard enough, I can still hear the unmistakable clatter of a skateboard rolling toward me, or the slap of worn-out Converse hitting the pavement as someone yelled my name from the end of the block. Everyone knew everyone, and somehow it felt like the world couldn't change without asking our street for permission first. We had our friends, our neighborhoods, our little rituals, the things that made the world feel safe, even when life wasn't perfect. Tonight, as I speak these words, I want you to walk with me back into those moments, not as a visitor, but as someone who lived them in your own way, because somewhere inside you, buried beneath routines, responsibilities, and the noise of the modern world, your 1980s still exist. And in this story, in this journey we're about to take together, I want to help you find them again, slowly, carefully, like dusting off an old VHS tape, placing it into the player and watching the ghostly glow bring the past back to life. When I think about the 1980s, the very first image that comes to mind isn't a toy or a TV show or even a particular moment. It's a street, my street, your street. The kind of street that no longer exists, not really, except in the secret rooms of our memory. It breathed with us, it aged with us. It changed with the seasons, and somehow it carried our stories with the same reverence we carried our dreams. And if I close my eyes now, I can feel the ground beneath my feet, warm from the sun, still radiating that heat long after the day was supposed to be over. Imagine this with me. You're stepping outside in the early evening. The sky is fading into that soft violet that only the 80s seemed to have, like the world was covered with a thin layer of nostalgia even before it became a memory. The crickets are warming up in the grass. Someone down the block is turning on their porch light, one of those yellowish bulbs that made everything look softer, gentler. The air smells like the day's adventures still linger in it. The scent of sun-warmed asphalt, the faint smoke of someone grilling dinner, and that unmistakable mixture of sweat and childhood. As if freedom itself had a smell back then. The kind of scent that made you feel like the world was endless, and somehow everything in it belonged to you. I can still hear it now. The layered symphony of a neighborhood settling into dusk, the squeak of a rusty swing in someone's backyard, the metallic click of a mailbox shutting, the low rumble of a car that hadn't been washed in far too long, crawling slowly past like it was afraid to disturb the peace. There was always someone outside, always. A neighbor watering their lawn, kids trading baseball cards on a front step, a teenager practicing skateboard tricks even though everyone knew he'd fall again. Dogs barking in the distance, each one with a voice you could instantly recognize. And I remember walking down that familiar pavement, feeling the texture of it under my bare feet, rough, warm, real. Sometimes I'd drag my toes just to feel the small grains of loose gravel. Today, everything is too polished, too smooth, too clean. Back then, even imperfections felt like home. Our street had its rituals, unspoken sacred traditions we all followed, without realizing they would one day become irreplaceable. At a certain hour, we'd all gather near the lamppost, always the same one, with a sticker peeling halfway off and a small dent near the bottom. No one questioned it. No one suggested we meet somewhere else. That spot was ours, as if the universe had placed it there just for us. Sometimes nothing at all, because the real game was simply being together. There was a kind of quiet magic in that simplicity, in just existing next to someone without needing a reason or a plan or a schedule. But the feeling of belonging to something small, intimate and completely ours. Back then, we didn't realize that these ordinary evenings, these slow, unremarkable moments, would one day become the scenes our hearts returned to when the world felt too fast, too loud, too unfamiliar. If the pavement still holds the faint echoes of our laughter, if the air still hums with the ghost of who we used to be. Because whenever the night gets a little too quiet and I start drifting through old memories, I swear I can still hear it. The soft thud of sneakers against pavement, the low voices of friends sharing secrets, the world settling into a quiet that felt like safety. And every time I hear it again, even faintly, it feels like going home. There's something almost sacred about the way memories resurface, not as full scenes, but as fragments, little flashes of color, sound, emotion. And when I think of the 1980s, one fragment always returns first, the games we played. Not the ones on screens, but the ones invented on the spot, shaped by imagination, sunlight, and the exact number of kids who happened to show up that day. We didn't need instructions, we didn't need apps, scores, or rankings. All we needed was each other, and a reason to laugh so hard our stomachs hurt. But fairness never really mattered. What mattered was that the game lasted just a little bit longer, that daylight stretched just a little more before our parents called us home. The metallic clink of a chain-link fence shaking during a wild chase. The quick, sharp breaths of kids sprinting without worrying about getting tired. Those moments felt endless, not because they actually were, but because we didn't yet understand the weight of time. Someone always shouted advice from the sidelines, bad advice usually, but offered with such confidence that I followed it anyway. And every time the ball cracked against the bat, time seemed to freeze for a split second, long enough for hope to flare in your chest, long enough to believe, truly believe, that anything was possible. Talking about the kind of things only kids can talk about with total sincerity, what we wanted to be when we grew up, whether aliens were real, why adults seem so tired all the time. I remember the smell of dirt, of summer, of innocence, and I remember how every now and then a cloud would drift by, shaped just like something one of us had dreamed about, and we'd point to it and swear it was a sign. Signs were everywhere back then, because we still believed the world was leaving clues for us to find. Games made in the quiet corners of the neighborhood, behind the shed where someone hid a stack of comic books, or under the wide branches of the tree whose roots twisted like ancient veins. There was a thrill in those places, a sense that we were discovering bits of the world adults had forgotten how to see. And then there were the nighttime games. Those were the most magical of all. The night transformed familiar streets into something mysterious, enchanted. Every corner held a secret. Every echo carried a story. And when someone found you, the burst of laughter felt like electricity, pure, wild, unforgettable. They taught us resilience, scraping our knees, wiping the blood, and running again without a second thought. They taught us trust, that the kids beside us were our world, our friends, our tribe. And they taught us presence, how to live in a moment so fully that everything else disappeared. Today, I can't help but miss that. Not just the games, but the version of myself who believed the world was small enough to hold and big enough to explore endlessly. And for a moment, just a moment, I'm there again. It's strange, isn't it? How some people walk into your life at an age when you barely understand who you are, and yet they end up shaping everything you become. And when I think back to the 1980s, I don't remember those friends as they were. I remember them as they felt. Like colors, like sounds, like pieces of home. The sound was enough to spark something in your chest, excitement, possibility, the promise of adventure. We chose them because they lived 2 houses down, because they shared a popsicle with us on a hot day, because they laughed at the same stupid things, because when the streetlights came on they were standing right beside us, breathing the same dusty summer air. Every neighborhood had someone like him. The kid who was always barefoot, the kid who always seemed to know where the best hiding spots were, the kid who could turn an ordinary afternoon into a story that would stay with you for the rest of your life. He had a laugh that echoed off the houses like a spark bouncing between bricks, a laugh that made you think nothing in the world could ever go wrong. That friend knew how to listen, truly listen. Like your words were stones they were carefully placing into a pocket to carry home. That kind of friend is rare as you grow older. Adults pretend to listen, but kids really hear you. We didn't realize it at the time, but those friendships were our first glimpses into love. Not romantic love, but the kind rooted in loyalty, trust, shared wonder, and the unspoken promise that you'd show up for each other no matter what. And back then, showing up was simple. You just walked over. I remember the sound of bicycle chains clicking as we rode side by side, the handlebars wobbling a little as we tried to talk, laugh, and keep our balance all at once. We moved as a small pack, a little crooked, a little clumsy, completely inseparable. The road ahead of us always looked endless. Even if the farthest we went was a few streets away, it felt like exploring the edges of the universe. The ones where we'd sit on someone's driveway, legs crossed, staring at the stars as if trying to decode some cosmic message sent just for us. It's funny how honest kids can be in moments like that. How we confessed our fears, our dreams, our insecurities without hesitation. We didn't yet know how to hide behind adult masks. I remember one friend saying he was afraid of growing up, afraid the world would change too fast. I laughed then, brushing it off, telling him we'd always be the same. But now, all these years later, I realize he was right. The world did change. We did too, faster than we imagined. And the friendships that once felt unbreakable, some dissolved quietly as the years passed, others faded into holiday cards, distant memories, or names we only mention when nostalgia hits hard enough to bring tears to the surface. But here's the strange and beautiful thing about memory. When I picture them now, those kids, those faces, those voices, they haven't aged at all. They're frozen in that golden light, barefoot on the pavement, laughter echoing off the walls of houses that probably don't exist anymore. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, I wonder if they ever think of me too, if somewhere in another town, another life, someone pauses for a moment because a sound, a scent, a song from the 80s pulls them back to our street, to the games, the nights, the laughter we shared. Maybe nostalgia is the proof that these moments mattered, that we mattered to each other, that even if time has carried us far from those days, the echoes of who we were still linger, still breathe, still wait for us in the corners of our hearts. Every friend, every face, every fragile, beautiful connection that made growing up feel like magic. If the days were filled with games and friendships, then the evenings belonged to something quieter, something almost mystical. There was a moment, a very specific moment, right between day and night, when the world seemed to hold its breath. And in the 1980s, that moment felt different, deeper, warmer, as if time itself softened, loosening its grip just long enough for us to breathe a little slower. The kind you only see in memory, never in photographs. The cicadas would start their chorus, that long, droning hum that made the air feel alive, like everything around us was vibrating with some hidden meaning. There was the distant sound of a TV leaking through someone's open window, the static buzz of an old antenna trying to catch a signal. You could hear forks clinking against plates as families sat down for dinner, the laughter of siblings who still had energy even after a long day outside. And somewhere, always somewhere, a screen door slammed shut, its springs squeaking in that familiar, comforting way. The kind of peace that settles deep in your chest, the kind that makes the whole world feel safe. I used to press my palm against it, as if trying to capture the last bit of heat before the night claimed it. The smell of asphalt rising into the air, mixed with the faint aroma of someone's freshly cut grass, or the sweetness of flowers tucked into a neighbor's garden. It was in these in-between moments, these twilight hours, that my mind wandered the most. I'd think about the day I'd just lived, replaying every game, every laugh, every argument that had already stopped mattering. Childhood has a way of forgiving instantly. One minute you're fighting over who was out, and the next minute you're sharing a bag of chips like nothing ever happened. I remember wondering why adults always looked so tired when evenings were clearly the most beautiful part of the day, why they rushed through moments that felt sacred, why they never stopped to just be. Sometimes, if the air was cool enough, I'd get goosebumps, not from the temperature, but from that strange, tingling sense that I was witnessing something important, even if I didn't understand it. Like the universe was whispering a secret in a language only kids could hear. That soft hum, that warm glow, it felt like a signal, as if the world was shifting into its second act. And for a brief moment, every house, every tree, every crack in the sidewalk looked like it held a hidden story waiting to be discovered. The light was never perfect. It flickered just enough to remind you it was old, dependable, and somehow alive. That lamppost saw everything. It knew our names, our secrets, our dreams. It knew when we were scared, when we were brave, when we stood on the edge of becoming something new. Sometimes a friend would join me there, stepping into the glow like an actor entering a stage. We'd talk about nothing and everything, the kind of conversations that only happen when the world feels quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. And even now, when I walk outside at dusk and see a streetlight flicker on, my heart tightens, not in sadness, but in recognition. As if some ancient part of me remembers exactly who I was in those moments. And for an instant, that version of me, small, hopeful, barefoot on warm pavement, stands beside me again. Maybe that's what nostalgia really is. Not longing for the past, but remembering the person you used to be, the one who felt everything so deeply, so simply, so purely. If the twilight belonged to quiet thoughts, then the nights of the 1980s belonged entirely to something else, a kind of enchantment that only children can access. Nights back then didn't feel dangerous the way they do now. They felt open, wide, mysterious, in the softest and safest way possible. Stepping outside after dark felt like stepping into the pages of a storybook we didn't know we were writing together. The wind carried scents you couldn't find during the day: damp soil, distant wood smoke, the faint metallic tang of old streetlights warming up. And every now and then, a breeze would pass through the trees and make them whisper. It sounded like they were telling secrets meant only for those willing to listen. The world looked different under the moon. Shadows stretched into long, fragile shapes, and every familiar object wore a softer, dreamlike outline. The white paint on the curb seemed to glow faintly, and the chalk drawings we'd made earlier blurred into pastel ghosts beneath the dim light. Even the cracks in the sidewalk felt like tiny maps leading to places we hadn't yet discovered. We'd speak in hushed voices, the kind that made even the simplest words sound important. Someone would suggest a game, and we'd run through the dark, our feet slapping gently against the pavement, our breaths forming small clouds in the air if the night was cool enough. Some nights were meant for wandering. The sound of the rubber tires rolling over gravel was strangely soothing, like a soft drumbeat guiding us deeper into the night. Behind those windows were entire lives, entire stories happening just out of reach. And I remember wondering, even as a child, what those people were feeling, what they were dreaming about. Nights made me curious about the world, not in the loud, excited way of daytime, but in a quieter, more thoughtful way. They made me see how big everything really was, and how small I still felt inside it. That somewhere, just beyond the dark, other kids were living their own version of the same magic. It created this invisible thread between us, a connection made not through sight or touch, but through shared experience. The stars looked brighter back then, or maybe we just paid more attention. We tried to spot shapes in constellations we didn't know the names of. Someone would always say they saw a shooting star, even if none of us did, and we believed them, because believing felt better than doubting. And in those moments, silence wasn't empty, it was full of thoughts, of dreams, of feelings too big for words. Maybe the night left a mark that daylight could never wash away. And as we walked home, the night seemed to follow us, its mystery lingering in our steps. And I'd fall asleep holding on to that feeling, hoping tomorrow would bring another evening just like it. And sometimes, when the moon is full, I swear I can still feel it. There was something almost sacred about the way families of the 1950s moved through the world together, an invisible geometry that held them in orbit, a rhythm, a gravitational pull. You could feel it in the way a father placed his hand on the small of his child's back while crossing the street, or in the soft, unspoken nod a mother gave when it was time for everyone to rise from the dinner table. It lived in the air. The father washing the car in slow, patient circles, whistling a tune that drifted through the neighborhood like a quiet anthem of the weekend. And somehow, without a single word being spoken, everyone knew when it was time to help, to pause, to gather, to breathe. Today, we have more tools than ever to stay connected, and yet families drift in different directions, like scattered constellations across a dimming sky. But in the 1950s, families were solar systems. They revolved around one another. In those days, evenings had a particular glow to them, a softness, a fading amber light that spread across the living room floor as the sun set behind maple-lined streets. That twilight was the quiet signal that the day was slowing, that it was time to come home, that the world outside was no longer as important as the world inside. And oh, the sound of that world, the gentle clink of dishes being stacked, the warm hum of a radio show drifting across the room, the shuffling of slippers on hardwood floors, the quiet laughter of siblings inventing games out of almost nothing. This was the geometry of togetherness, 1,000 small, wordless gestures that created a sense of belonging so deep, so natural, it felt like breathing. A slammed door was followed moments later by a soft knock, a sigh, a mother's hand patting a shoulder, a father clearing his throat before explaining the world in terms that a child could understand. Conflict didn't fracture the home. It reminded everyone why the home mattered. Life itself was the strategy. Routine itself was the teacher. Presence itself was the glue. And perhaps that's what we miss the most. Not the objects, not the fashion, not even the rituals themselves, but the feeling of belonging to a small, sturdy world where every person's voice mattered, where every gesture held meaning, where every day followed a quiet choreography written not by rules, but by love. Because in the 1950s, being a family wasn't an aspiration. It wasn't something you worked on. It was simply who you were. From the moment you woke to the moment you slept, you were part of something larger, warmer, and more beautifully ordinary than anything we've managed to rebuild today. And when people look back, when they say they miss the old days, what they're really longing for is that invisible geometry, the comfort of knowing that no matter how wide the world became, you had a place where you fit. If you ask people what they miss most about the 1950s, they rarely mention the big events. They don't talk about the holidays, the vacations, or the milestones captured in faded scrapbook photos. Moments like the gentle creak of the back screen door on a summer evening, or the way fireflies drifted through the yard as children sat on the steps, swinging their legs, waiting for their parents to finish talking after dinner. It was in those spaces, between chores, between conversations, between responsibilities, that family bonds were formed without effort, without intention, simply by existing together. A child would wander into the room, perhaps with a book, perhaps with nothing at all, and curl up on the floor beside him. They didn't need to speak. The warmth came from proximity, not conversation. A daughter would join her, taking the peels and forming shapes on the table, trying to guess how long she could make a single unbroken spiral. These were not activities. They were not quality time. They were life in its simplest and most honest form. What made these quiet moments so powerful wasn't what was happening in them, but what wasn't. There were no screens pulling attention away, no constant noise, no competing voices from outside the home. The world did not demand immediate responses. Nothing vibrated in your pocket. Nothing interrupted the stillness. The family existed in a soft, protected bubble of time. A time when a single evening felt long enough to breathe, to rest, to understand each other. And a childhood felt like an endless summer. They knew when to ask for help, when to sit close, when to simply watch and learn. The world outside might have been uncertain. Bills had to be paid. Work could be hard. Life was not as effortless as nostalgia often paints it. But inside the home, inside those quiet moments, there was a sense of safety that wrapped itself around every member of the family, like a soft blanket of familiarity. They grew together. They breathed together. They existed in a shared emotional climate that made even the simplest tasks, setting the table, folding laundry, trimming the hedges, feel like acts of unity. Life itself handed you moments that decades later would glow in memory like lanterns in the dark. I sometimes think the real magic of the 1980s wasn't inside the houses at all, but out there on the streets that shaped us. The long sidewalks, the cracked pavement, the cul-de-sacs where friendships were forged in the glow of street lamps that hummed softly at dusk. Not the cushioned sneakers kids wear today, but the thin-soled ones that let you feel the world. Every pebble, every shift in the ground, every beat of childhood energy carrying you from one adventure to the next. You could hear us before you saw us. The clatter of bikes with loose chains, the slap of jump ropes hitting concrete, the metallic ping of baseballs against aluminum bats, and the faint echo of someone calling out across the neighborhood. A name drifting through the warm air like a familiar melody. We didn't need permission to explore. We didn't need supervision. The world itself seemed to watch over us, gently, quietly, as if it understood that childhood needed room to breathe. One moment they were a hopscotch grid. The next, they were the borders of imaginary kingdoms where we ruled with stick swords and unmatched bravado. The chalk dust clung to our hands, our clothes, even our faces, And somehow that dust felt like a badge of honor, proof that we had lived a full day. And then there were the bikes, our horses, our rockets, our escape vehicles. We rode them like they were extensions of our own bodies, leaning into turns, racing down small hills, letting the wind push tears out of our eyes, as if the world were reminding us, "You're alive. Don't forget it." But we knew every inch of those streets. Every driveway, every mailbox, every overgrown bush that served as the perfect hiding spot during nighttime games. We knew the exact sound each friend's door made when it opened, and whose mum's voice could cut through 3 blocks of laughter when dinner was ready. When they flickered on, that soft orange glow stretching long shadows across the pavement, you could feel the day winding down. But instead of sadness, there was this tender ache, a kind of quiet acceptance that another chapter of childhood had just been lived, and tomorrow would bring a new one. Sometimes, when the evening air cooled and the world softened, we'd lie down on the warm asphalt, hands behind our heads, and watch the sky turn from gold to pink to a deep, endless blue. The street beneath us would still radiate the heat it had absorbed during the day, as if holding on to sunlight just a little longer. The same way we held on to those moments without realizing they would one day become priceless. Not because nothing bad ever happened, but because the community was alive. Neighbors knew each other, parents trusted the world, and the world somehow lived up to that trust. They were the first places where we learned independence, where we discovered who we were when nobody was watching, where we practiced courage, friendship, curiosity, and the quiet beginnings of who we would someday become. But perhaps, if they're lucky, a place where they felt the same freedom we once did, running through the heartbeat of the neighborhood, believing the world was big, generous, and waiting for them. When I think back to the 1980s, the memories that hit the hardest aren't about the things we owned, but the people we shared those years with. The friends who felt less like friends and more like extensions of our own souls. The ones who showed up at our doors without calling, who knew our parents almost as well as we did, who didn't need explanations or invitations or reasons. I remember how we'd wake up on a Saturday morning already thinking about each other, already wondering what adventure we'd create that day. There was no texting, no planning ahead, just the sound of footsteps running up to your porch, followed by that unmistakable knock. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The signal, your cue to grab your shoes and rush outside. Some friendships begin with long conversations. Ours began with shared silence, sitting on old curbside edges, kicking gravel with worn-out sneakers, letting the day unfold naturally. There was comfort in just being together, a kind of unspoken understanding that didn't need words. About the future, which felt distant and shimmering like a horizon too far to touch. About the present, which felt infinite, like we were suspended in a bubble of time that would never burst. And about our secret hopes, the ones we whispered only to each other, because we believed that friends were protectors of dreams. We played until our legs were tired and our voices hoarse. We made up rules, then broke them, then remade them again. We argued and forgave each other within the same hour, because in the 1980s, holding a grudge felt like wasting precious minutes of daylight. Sometimes we'd just wander, 2 or 3 of us, walking without purpose, letting the warm air guide us between backyards and alleyways, past clotheslines whispering in the breeze and windows glowing softly with the smell of dinners cooking inside. The kind of closeness that forms not from talking, but from existing side by side through seasons of childhood. The kind of laughter that makes your stomach hurt and your eyes water and your soul expand in ways you don't understand until you're much older. But life has a way of drifting people to different corners of the map. Careers, cities, families, responsibilities. They stretch the threads of connection until all that's left are memories. Sometimes I'll be in the middle of something ordinary, closing the blinds at night, hearing a basketball bounce in the distance, smelling fresh-cut grass. And suddenly, I'm transported back to those days, to those faces, to the kids who saw me before the world reshaped me. How to imagine, how to be brave, how to belong. If the streets were our kingdom and our friends were our family, then the games we played in the 1980s were the language we spoke. A language made not of words, but of dares, laughter, scraped knees, and the innocent certainty that the world belonged to us. Kick the Can wasn't just a game, it was a test of stealth and bravery. Red Rover wasn't just kids holding hands, it was a battle of wills, a challenge to run hard enough to break through the line and gentle enough to not hurt the friends who stood waiting, smiling through the anticipation. It taught us patience, fear, hope, and curiosity all at once. It taught us what it meant to be alone in the dark corners of a familiar world, listening to our own breath, waiting for footsteps, feeling the thrill of being found and the strange loneliness of hiding too well. It was in the way those games shaped us. We didn't need branded toys or expensive equipment. A ball, a stick, a chalk line, a tin can, that was our universe. And we loved it because it was ours. Handmade, improvised, perfect. The metallic rattle of a chain-link fence as someone brushed against it during a chase. The chorus of voices calling time-outs, do-overs, and last chances. The echo of feet pounding across yards that blended seamlessly from house to house, because back then the neighborhood felt like a single shared world. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the street, every game took on a new dimension. The air grew cooler, the light softer, the stakes somehow higher, as if nighttime transformed the familiar into something mythic. We'd switch to glow-in-the-dark tag, or flashlight hide-and-seek, or those whispery nighttime games that only made sense in the warm hush of evening, when fireflies blinked between trees, and the world felt wide and mysterious in the most beautiful way. When we believed the shadows held secrets, and every backyard could turn into a forest, a battlefield, a dream, our whole souls. It doesn't need to be posted. It doesn't need to be preserved. They were our first lessons in life, wrapped in laughter, painted in sunlight, and carried forever in memory. Evenings in the 1980s had a way of settling over the world like a warm blanket, slowly, gently, without rushing anyone along. It was as if time itself exhaled at dusk, giving us a chance to drift into the night with a kind of peace that feels almost impossible to recapture now. The way the air cooled but never chilled, the way the cicadas hummed their endless chorus as if they were stitching the day to the night with their song. I can still feel the texture of the air, that subtle blend of cut grass, pavement still warm from the sun, and someone's dinner drifting from an open kitchen window. There was something comforting about knowing the world was winding down. Street by street, porch lights blinked on, shimmering halos in the settling dusk, casting long, gentle shadows that danced across sidewalks and driveways. Those lights weren't warnings or reminders. They were invitations, signals that it was time to slow down, to gather, to breathe. I remember sitting on the curb with friends, knees tucked to our chests, talking about nothing at all. The day's games would be done, the laughter softened, our legs sore and dusty, our hands still stained with whatever we'd touched that afternoon. Chalk, dirt, popsicle juice, or something as simple as sunshine. Not silent, never silent, but quiet in a way the modern world no longer understands. You could hear the faint clatter of dishes being washed, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, the hum of a single passing car as it rolled through the neighborhood with headlights that seemed softer than the ones we see today. The flicker of a TV set glowing in a living room where your father sat with one leg crossed over the other, the soft clinking of ice in a glass, the rustle of a newspaper being folded, the steady buzz of a floor fan turning left, then right, sweeping cool air through the rooms like it was brushing away whatever lingered from the day. You could lose yourself staring up, wondering about the future, imagining who you'd become, hoping that growing older wouldn't take away the magic of evenings like these. A sense that even the smallest moments were part of something larger, something quietly beautiful. Those evenings didn't demand anything from us. They didn't need to be documented or shared or validated. They existed purely to be felt, unforgettable in ways we're only able to understand decades later, when the noise of life grows too loud and we find ourselves longing for a world where the night arrived like a friend, steady, warm, familiar, ready to guide us gently into tomorrow. There was something unmistakable about the homes of the 1980s, a kind of lived-in warmth that wrapped around you the moment you stepped inside. It wasn't about design or perfection or curated furniture. It was about the life inside those walls, the sounds, the smells, the tiny imperfections that made everything feel real. I remember how walking into my house felt like stepping into a world built just for me. The faint scent of furniture polish on the wooden cabinets, the lingering aroma of dinner, meatloaf, sometimes spaghetti, sometimes whatever leftovers my mother managed to turn into something new. There was always a noise somewhere. The soft hum of a box fan, the muffled dialogue from a TV in another room, the creak of the hallway floorboard that somehow became part of the family. It came from warm bulbs hidden behind lampshades that glowed like fireflies, casting golden pools across the carpet. Everything looked softer in that light. The photographs on the walls, the worn edges of the coffee table, the faces of the people we loved. I can still picture the details. The embroidered pillows on the couch that no one was supposed to lean on, the crocheted blankets draped over chairs, the bowl of plastic fruit on the dining table that somehow managed to look real, and the shaggy rug that swallowed your feet when you walked across it. The clatter of pots, the sticky handles of cabinets touched thousands of times. The refrigerator covered in magnets, letters, calendars, coupons, and those school photos where none of us knew how to smile naturally. And every now and then there was a slice of cake covered with a glass dome, as if sweetness itself needed protection from the world. You could walk in after a long day outside, sweaty and exhausted, and immediately feel the shift. The way the air cooled your skin, the way the carpet cushioned your steps, the way familiar smells settled your heartbeat. Sometimes the wallpaper peeled a little in the corners, or the paint on the windowsill cracked in the summer heat, or a drawer stuck every time you tried to open it. But those imperfections weren't flaws. They were memories etched into the structure itself. I think about the night rituals that made those homes feel alive. A parent flipping through a TV guide, someone yelling, "Don't touch that dial," the static crackling before the picture settled into place. I can still hear the clunk of the VCR when a tape slid in, the whirring motor pulling it into the machine like it was swallowing a treasure. And then there was the sound of laughter, the kind that rose and fell unpredictably, rolling through the house like music you didn't realize you needed. Those sounds made me feel safe, anchored, held. A story that still whispers to me sometimes, late at night, when the world grows still, and a part of my heart starts longing for a place that exists now, only in memory. There was something curious about the homes of the 1960s, something almost impossible to find in a modern house today, a silence filled with meaning. It wasn't the silence of emptiness or the absence of noise. It was the silence that came from peace, that gentle, unspoken order of life that made everything feel settled, familiar, and safe. Mornings began with the soft crackle of an AM radio, playing a song every mother seemed to know by heart. The kettle whistled, golden sunlight pooled through thin curtains. And for a brief moment, everything in the world felt exactly as it should be. In the living room, the floral sofas held conversations that would never be written down, only lived. And the wall clock didn't mark time like an enemy chasing you. It marked it like an old friend saying, "Take it slow. Everything will come in its moment." They breathed through small, almost invisible moments. Today, silence almost feels uncomfortable, as if we must fill it with something. Music, voices, screens, anything. But in the 1960s, silence was part of the soul of the home. And when you look back, perhaps to that small childhood house with its modest kitchen and creaky floors. You realize it wasn't the silence itself that was special. When I think about the 1960s, I don't just remember the houses. I remember the streets, the long, sun-faded paths where our childhoods quietly unfolded. Back then, kids didn't ask for permission to explore. The streets themselves gave us permission. They seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the whole neighborhood belonged to us, as if every sidewalk crack and mailbox and telephone pole carried a story waiting to be found. You could step outside with nothing but your imagination, and somehow the day already felt full. There were no phones to track us, no screens to distract us, no constant alerts to break the magic of the moment. We lived inside the world, not behind a window looking at it. And those streets had their own heartbeat, steady, warm, familiar. There was the neighbor's yard, where someone was always fixing something. A car, a fence, a toy, their entire life held together with patience and a toolbox. The clatter of marbles rolling on concrete, a distant dog barking at absolutely nothing, the hollow bounce of a red rubber ball skipping down the street. Laughter, real, unfiltered, echoing all the way to sunset. But maybe the most precious thing about those streets was this unspoken truth: we were not afraid. If we cried, someone's mother dried our tears with the same gentleness as our own. And even now, decades later, when I close my eyes and let the memory settle, I can still feel the sun on my back, the gravel under my shoes, and the strange, beautiful certainty that the world, at least in that little corner, would always be kind. In the end, when all the streets fade, when the games quiet down, when the years fold themselves into memory, what truly remains are the people who walked those days with us. The ones who raced us down the block, who shared sodas at the corner store, who sat with us on warm summer nights, talking about nothing and everything at once. But every one of them left something. A laugh, a gesture, a lesson, a moment so gentle and human that it stayed stitched to our soul. The whisper of a friendship that once made the world feel infinite. And then there are the people we loved inside the walls of our homes, the ones who raised us, guided us, shaped us, the ones whose voices we still hear when we need courage, the ones who taught us how to walk through the world with gentleness, or strength, or patience. Some of them left too soon, some stayed until their hair turned silver, but all of them continue living quietly inside us. And maybe that's why nostalgia feels so heavy and so beautiful at the same time. It is the weight of love we never lost, only carried forward. We were collecting pieces of eternity. It is the ache of a life well lived, of moments that mattered, of people who shaped the deepest parts of who you are.